Hello and welcome to the Godscast at Graphic Policy. My name is Steve,
And I'm Chris.
and we are here to talk about issue number 2, which sort of takes off right from in media race with Laura overhearing a very important name, Ananke, as Lucifer is hauled away, having question mark just assassinated a judge.
So, help me out here. Is Ananke a name that exists outside
Hmm.
this comic? Because it sounds familiar, but it's not something that I don't want to Google it because then I'll
That
get
is a
spoiled. So,
yes. Well, this
okay.
is where I think just searching on Wikipedia is like your safety net because it's not going to, unless you like specifically click on the disambiguation page. Ananke is in fact as Laura finds out when she Googles it on her cell phone, Ananke is indeed a Greek goddess, one of the primordial deities, born from the void of chaos. So she's sort of one of the ancient gods. Um, and her ew, um,
Gotcha.
she her father and consort were both Kronos, the god of time. Um, so she is the mother of fates. Okay, all right, that fits.
Okay, yeah. So, in her pantheon, she's someone, a progenitor, not someone who's actively worshipped and dealt with in everyday
Yeah,
life.
she
I feel like that's important here.
yeah very much a behind the scenes goddess. So we then sort of skip to Laura and her family watching the news, and this is where we get the first appearance of Ball, as he makes a TV appearance.
Right, and Ball is requires his own disambiguation page because I know I've heard that name in several
Yes.
pantheons before.
Although,
It was several pages before I got a handle on
yeah,
who he is and what he's up to.
yeah, and in fact, there's going to be a lot more discussion in the next issue about who specifically Ball is. Um, I did like speaking of the sort of like Laura doing the cell phone thing. Um, I like the way that Kieron Gillen uses cell phone text as like both kind of a goof, but also like a way to like show thought bubbles in a different context, where like she's looking at the different results, and then like you can see her internal process of like, oh god, do I have to go to the second page? This is homework.
Hmm.
Um, which is kind of fun. Okay, so then we get Laura going to the prison, um, where there are a group. Did you notice the protesters outside the prison?
I did not until you pointed it out. So
Yeah,
these
they're
are Lucifer's fans, I take it.
they're kind of groupies. They're all dressed up like Lucifer.
I mean, to be fair, there's a lot of people in suits like that in courthouses. So
Yeah, but I mean, what it kind of reminded me of is when the Michael Jackson trial was going on, and like there were tons of outside the courthouse. You could see like Michael Jackson fans, and like some of them were wearing the red jacket and the spangly glove.
that's a very disturbing parallel, actually.
Yeah, well, uh,
I'm gonna have a few nightmares about that. Thanks.
okay, sorry about that.
That's
Um,
all right.
we also we also learned kind of some interesting stuff about Laura. So, um, having she's talking about like what's going on with her education and her like view of her future, and just to sort of like translate from the British, um, what she's basically saying is she's a high school senior and she's planning to drop out and like tank her SATs. and like not go to college. Which
Yeah,
kind of
go ahead.
which kind of feeds into that, like her line about my future is this or my future is nothing. Like, kind of an interesting life plan.
It's not a characterization I'm particularly fond of, and
Mm-hmm.
I perhaps I'll change my mind about that in a later issue, but I mean, seeing this young, clearly smart woman of color having no ambitions other than to do what these famous, maybe magical people are doing, I don't know. It doesn't feel satisfying to me.
Mm. Okay. Well, let's we'll follow this thread as it goes. So she gets to meet Lucifer, and it's kind of interesting. Like Lucifer starts off in a very like playing the rock star mode where she's like, okay, sex, cocaine, cigarettes. That's what
Hmm.
I'm about. And then like after a minute, you get to see this whole nother stage. Sorry, this whole nother side of Lucifer. And we learn a ton of stuff about like what the rules are, what Ananke's role in this is, and most importantly, um, like how Lucifer became a god. Um, so the new stuff that we learn is that there are 12 gods. I mean, we kind of saw that from
Yeah, the number of
the
circles.
yeah, that they reincarnate, and that it happens every 90 years, and that Ananke is the one who like kind of welcomes them into godhood.
Yeah, she sort of.
What did you
Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, what did you think of like the transformation scene? Because
This
this is the first time that we see like someone becoming a god.
I had to actually stop reading for a bit and start to think about what this means. So, knowing that individual people are chosen for whatever reason and then infused with godlike powers makes like there's a lot of mechanical questions I have here. So,
Mm,
uh, does she get the memories of the other people who have been Lucifer? Um,
that's a very good question.
does Lucifer, him or herself, have some kind of personality that kind of takes over? Like, what is. I don't remember catching her name before she was transformed, but what happens to the.
Eleanor Rigby,
Really?
which is which is very significant because her parents are like super into retro music.
Okay.
So you get the sense that like these are kind of like hipster parents who named their kid in a very precious way that no doubt was like incredibly annoying to them.
Right. Now, Eleanor. So, my question is what's left of Eleanor? And then there's the fact that
Yeah,
this is Satan who is being brought in.
yeah.
So, this leads me to questions. Okay, this had to come from somewhere. How many times has Satan been reincarnated? Are
That's a good
are
question.
are our historical religious texts stories of people who have gone through this process and been imbued with these powers and just been
Yeah, how much has this changed the world?
well, yeah, but also like
And
how much of what we know of Satan from the Bible is just someone who's been imbued with this particular spirit?
right.
Has the spirit sort
Yeah.
of taken on that moniker and sort of used it as branding? These are all the questions I have. And
Yeah.
with all the faces, is that an art reference that I don't get? Because I don't know anything about art history.
I don't know either. I to be honest, like I think it's mostly like they're clearly trying to like say that it's this sort of like tunnel, right? Where like you start at the top and in like you fall down and then you're transformed. And like having a Nanke's face all around you really does kind of like hammer home her role in the process, her degree of sort of authorship in a word. Um, so those are some really interesting questions. Some ones that kind of like sprung to my mind. Um, so one thing I think is really interesting is that like Eleanor brings a knife out into the yard. Like she's not like signing up on the dotted line as far as we can tell. It just happens to her.
Yeah, there's no
Like
consent
she's
here.
exactly. The other thing that I think is interesting is in addition to the like dead within 2 years thing, um, the idea that you're going to be both loved and hated, and like the equation of brilliance and being dead. You know, like I think it does raise that like whole kind of trope within creative works in general about like the tortured genius or like the James Dean, only the good die young kind of mythos. Like how entangled is this idea of like brilliance or inspiration with like tragic death? Do we need figures to die tragically in order to be inspired by them? And then getting back to your question about like kind of personality transfer. Ananke's, the way that she talks about it, right? She says, we meet again. I've missed you, right? That suggests a continuity, with the past. But, the way that kind of Lucifer herself talks, like, I definitely get the sense that there's quite a bit of Eleanor Rigby inside her.
Hmm.
Although, and this gets to like what she says next, she's very performative. That's one of the things that sort of this issue reminded me is like when she says, I need to be on a stage. If I can't do that, it's so awfully pointless. Is that like she's really kind of committing to being Lucifer as like, I mean, look, this is a character visually based off Bowie, right?
Right.
So, she's like kind of committing to that character in the same way that Bowie would commit to being Ziggy Stardust or the Thin White Duke, or you know what I mean,
Right.
or even Jareth, I guess. Um,
Oh God,
the
Jareth.
other thing that's kind of
Sorry.
yeah, the other thing that's kind of interesting is like given that we're talking about Lucifer, um, it's kind of interesting that like her relationship to Ananke reminds me of a sort of a rebellious child and a parent, where like she's clearly kind of pushing against the rules, but still kind of hoping that the parent can bail them out. You know what I mean?
Hmm. Yeah, I feel that. There's backing up to the image of her falling through the tunnel, though. There's two very
Uh huh.
specific things that were evoked from me, and unfortunately, both of them are obscure references.
Mm-hmm.
The first is Final Fantasy IX, which, I mean, spoilers for a 20-year-old game, but there's a point where you walk into a room with a bunch of stone faces on the wall and they start talking to you. And what you eventually learn here is that you are a vessel. That, like, there's a dying world, and there was a dying world, and the people who lived on that dying world have sort of gone to sleep on some kind of spaceship, and you are one of the sort of bodies they've grown to put their consciousness into. So it evokes kind of, and I know it's cute, but it also makes me wonder. It's like, again, what is Eleanor's role in this? Is Lucifer a personality who wants to be again and is taking her body and her memories in order to do that? Are humans being farmed for this particular reason? You find a good one, you take them over for a few years. Make sense?
Yeah, I mean it is interesting because in the next page, right, when she makes this offer to Laura, which is like a big deal, right? She's offering stardom. Um, the way that she says Lucifer implies demons.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like to a certain extent, there's almost like a disassociation. Like she knows that there's this role, Lucifer, but I'm really not sure. Does she remember having been Lucifer? Like, um, which and it's also like this is a key moment for Laura because like this is the thing that she wants more than anything else in the world, and like she's being offered it because she's the one person to reach out.
Mm-hmm.
As she puts it, Lucifer is in hell, and you're the only one who came. Um, and that's kind of an interesting point, of inflection, especially as we see what happens later. Okay, and then we move to like the next big sequence in the issue, which is the National Portrait Gallery. And this is where, like, as a historian, my interest started to get piqued hugely because, like, we get a sense of, through the conversations with Cassandra, like, we get a sense of um, how the Pantheon has operated historically.
Yes, there's a giant hole in the world building here that I need to address or it's going to bug me.
Okay,
Cassandra
go ahead.
has a master's in comparative mythology.
Mm-hmm.
Why is she a reporter? I mean, it feels a little weird that the profession she fell into has something relevant to her education. And I mean,
That's a good question.
I don't know if there's going to be answers there, but it's also,
I mean, I guess the question is like, okay, so, this sort of thing happens every 90 years, right?
mm-hmm.
And then you happen to be like, old, like your age is just right. So that the thing that you studied, right? Previously in issue 1, she was talking about this like, they've got silent movie footage. That's the only like modern documentation that they have of any of this stuff. And like now all of a sudden in the YouTube era, there are gods again.
Mm-hmm.
So like I'm not sure like is she like did she stay in academia? Is she just sort of like a YouTube personality? Is she like, a gigging journalist working for like the Guardian or the Daily Mail or something like that?
It's just a skill set she wouldn't have studying comparative mythology. So,
Yeah.
and this probably wouldn't bother me because I could see someone kind of doing the Melissa Harris Perry route, something super relevant. I happen to be a good speaker. I'm going to turn my actual knowledge into a profession in an industry that needs people with knowledge but doesn't have any. That would make sense if she were
Yeah.
not a.
Sorry, that last bit got roboted.
If she were not a
If she,
skeptic, I would buy this, but she doesn't seem to
yes.
believe this. So it.
Well, that's the yeah, this is where like it gets really interesting because you know she you get the sense that I mean she's now had like the power of the gods demonstrated physically in front of her,
Mm-hmm.
and here she sort of like takes it, she has to react to that, and she takes sort of an intellectual step back. And when Laura says Lucy's amazing fakery exploded those guys' heads, she says, not that, what they do when they speak, the tongues, that's a lie. It does nothing. It means nothing. So you get the sense that her issue is that the glossolalia, right, the thing that happens at these concerts, and she's been to all of them, has no effect on her. Um, and like she feels kind of bitter about it. And that seems to be like where a lot of her kind of cynicism, skepticism comes from, is like, it doesn't work on me. Um, and therefore, it's got to be lies. Um, which is, kind of an interesting perspective.
It's it's not particularly new to me in that I've been an atheist since I was like 14.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really truck with the the YouTube assholes or any of that. I don't particularly care, but one thing I always did run into is having grown up in South Texas in a background of some very religious people. These kind of effects work if you buy into the premise
Right.
that Jesus is flowing through you. And I've seen some, she would describe it as mass delusion, but this is clearly, this is what you feel during a concert times a million because you think it's God working through you.
Right.
The fact that she walks in not having it, I think, is an important piece of the puzzle here.
Yeah. I mean, the old phrase that the worst kind of cynic is a disappointed idealist.
Yeah.
Like, I get the sense that like she was really into this when it was like just an academic thing, and then like was kind of excited when it became real, but then like couldn't get into the party. You know what I mean? Like it didn't hit her, and I imagine there's a huge, profound disappointment in that. So the other thing I wanted to talk about, it's like a very brief beat, and you could easily miss it. So when she points to the painting and she says, "The latest incarnation of Mad, Bad, and Dangerous to Know," do you know who that painting is of?
Let me find it. I don't. It looks familiar, though.
That's Byron. So the implication is in this timeline, Lord Byron was Lucifer, which, like, that's very fitting.
Okay. I need to process this for a second.
So, yeah.
All right. So this has brought something that may be too early to talk about, but so Lucifer has come and gone. We know just from like the math, it can't be the same 12 gods every time.
Yeah, it switches. In fact, we know that because, like, some of the gods that were the 1920s cycle that we saw. One of those was Susanoo, who is the Japanese thunder god, and they don't seem to be around.
Right. So that leads me to, okay, so are these the same entities putting on different brands?
That is a great question. I have no idea.
The corollary there is, back when these were actively worshipped as gods, are they taking advantage of the people who are worshiping them and making different brands there? So it's, I have this question about, and this is the second pop culture reference I was going to bring it back to, was Carnival, which, again, obscure but important here.
I remember that show.
That show was so far ahead of its time, and it flopped horribly because of it. The premise there that you don't know unless you dig into the Wikipedia is that there are these cosmically powered people who struggle throughout history, and who is victorious sort of charts the course for a generation of mankind. And the events that happen as they struggle are interpreted and written down, and so they make it very clear that Jesus was one of these people.
Right. And, at least from what we've seen so far, this seems to suggest that, like, the gods of this world sort of have a similar impact, but through culture. So, like, here we have a bunch of gods who are modern day pop stars, right? But in the 1830s, right, what's the sort of cultural equivalent of being a pop star is being a capital R romantic poet, right? Challenging the status quo, inventing new mediums, new, concepts. So that's one of the things I think is really interesting, is like that Gillen is taking this idea of kind of cultural rebellion and then showing it in, or like cultural transformation, and then showing it in different kind of periods and stages and mediums. So one other thing, you know, like if part of Cassandra is being the like uber cynic Nathiest, and another part of it is being the like master student, with what is it, a student loan's worth of crap rolling around in her head. Another side is like the journalist, because there's this really important moment where she says, um, you do realize what you're suggesting. We look into this. We're looking for someone with these extra normal abilities who's willing to kill and then cover it up. That's conspiracy. That's Watergate with superpowers. Fuck me, that's just about irresistible. So, like, she's really, like, this is where I think there is this, like, open question of, like, okay, so where exactly does she fit within the world of journalism? But, like, she's into the story, right? She, the idea of like a divine conspiracy is like, it gets her going.
Well, the cynical side of me is also
and like
saying this is we know now that, for lack of a better term, superpowers exist. How do we
yeah
now recontextualize our religious beliefs in that context? So these are superpowers that we don't understand. There are things, you could step back and say, okay, I don't remember who said it, but someone way back when said that there is a very rare event where the Red Sea gets super shallow. And so, okay, contextualizing that as like, oh, that's why they were able to cross the Red Sea. Now, put into this world mutants who can control the weather or make people's heads explode.
right.
Now, how do you reclassify divine things that we worship and think are the be all and end all of how the world works? And as an atheist, it's like, oh, look, now I have an explanation for these events that actually happen but are not divine.
Yeah.
Make sense?
Yeah, and the flip side of that, and this is something that we were talking a little bit about last episode, is like, what does this do for contemporary religion? Because not only are these, I mean, first of all, the fact that Lucifer is in the same pantheon as like Amaterasu, Sekhmet, Woden, Inanna, Minerva, Morrigan, Tara, like, that's gotta fuck with people's heads. I mean, this is where like I can see some people who are into comparative mythology being like, what is going on? Because Lucifer is a very Christian concept. Like Lucifer as distinct from Satan. You know, you need like very specific Christian apocrypha to like get the whole, John Milton story going. But like you've got Japanese gods, you've got Egyptian gods, you've got Norse gods, you've got Babylonian gods, you've got Greek gods, you've got Celtic gods. And like that kind of, does that suggest to people that like all religions are true? And maybe that explains why like some Christian fundamentalists get machine guns and like try to, wipe out the, I don't know, demons or however they would
Well,
contextualize
there's some
this.
things notably missing, and that's why Lucifer's inclusion in the pantheon is, I feel, really important here, is that none of the gods we've seen manifested or symbols on the page, the circle of symbols of 12, none of them are the actual monodeities. Lucifer is a secondary character in the story of God as we know it. So, and I don't know if I'm using that word correctly or if it's even a word, but monodeities tend to be very jealous and say there are no other gods. So, do they not qualify? Do they not exist? Why is Lucifer, who has never been described as a god, I don't think, unless a couple of cults.
There are, I was gonna say, like, there are certain kind of like Gnostic traditions, the Druze, in in the Middle East. There's certain traditions which are like God creates the spiritual, the devil / Lucifer creates the physical world. But like, yeah, you're right. Normally, Lucifer is not seen as a deity, which is kind of interesting and leads to that question about like how much of this is
Well,
about
also,
branding.
what are the qualifications
So,
you need to be part
another
of?
thing, yeah. And speaking of which, so Cassandra gives us some interesting categorization. So she says, okay, who could do this? A fire god or someone who could abstractly play with fire, like a sky god. Um, but also possibly a chthonic god. And that, like, gives us. I mean, I'm not exactly sure, to be honest. I'm not sure, like, is it underworld, meaning in the sense of, like, the fires of hell, and that's why it's fire? Like, I'm a little unclear about that connection. Um, and then she just sort of lists like potential gods, like Amaterasu is maybe a suspect, Baal is maybe a suspect, Sekhmet maybe a suspect. That's an interesting one because like Sekhmet is a goddess of like war and sex. I don't remember fire being in her like
I mean,
oeuvre.
to be honest, at the end of
Woden,
this
yeah,
issue,
it's
I
like
was 100%
yeah,
convinced that Lucy did it herself. But
interesting. Oh, one other thing I want to ask you about before we go to the underground concert, because I want to make sure we get there in this issue. Um, what did you think about the whole question
I
mark
don't
around
know.
Tara?
I should have done my homework and looked up who Tara is. Honestly, this is a little weird, but my other podcast is covering Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and I am unspoiled on that. So I was a little worried that, oh God, do
Yeah.
I have to worry about potential Buffy spoilers in this thing? But I don't know enough about Tara. I'm probably going to check out Wikipedia as soon as we're done recording here. But I know that
Yeah, but I think it's interesting. She's introduced as a question mark. Like we don't know
yes.
who
However,
this god
I
is.
don't know if I'm right about this, but I think there are two divine beings named Terra from very different areas. One Ireland and one China.
Yeah.
Now I know this because
Yes.
I
Um.
listened to Julia
And
Sweeney when she adopted a Chinese girl. She wanted to name her Terra because it was the only uh, cultural reference she could find that fit both her Irish heritage and her daughter's Chinese heritage. Now, it's a funny
aha.
story. Her daughter ended up being called Mulan, which she hates because that was her original name, and
Oh my god.
Julia Sweeney was insistent that like she needs another name so that people don't think she named her after a Disney movie. But yeah, apparently she
Oh
was
boy.
old enough to comprehend it and wanted to keep it. So
Gotcha. Okay. So, um, the two of them have different assignments. Cassandra is going to go to try to infiltrate Valhalla. Um, I do think it's interesting, by the way, that like every time that Woden comes up, um, like he's described as a
as a
creep.
what? Oh, a creep. Okay.
A creep. So like Lucifer calls him, what is it? Woden and his cheerily racist army of ethnic monocultured Valkyrie fuck buddies. And then Cassandra says like, um, all the people who socialize at Woden, ugh, Valhalla. So it's like already before you ever meet him, you're like being
So
conditioned
this
like
came out
this guy's a douchebag.
in 2014, right?
Yeah, I think like they tried hard to be like sort of semi contemporaneous, but like obviously the like what's it called? Oh, what's it's not foreshortened. D something comic writing. Like it started out contemporaneously, and because their events move a little bit closer together than the actual
Well,
comic
there's
publication, it's
I bring
become
it up
less
because
so.
there's another
Because like
big reference to Valhalla that came out a year later, and that was Mad Max Fury Road. And that
Oh, right.
doesn't seem that different from what she's describing here. I don't know if you've seen this movie or if our
Yeah.
listeners have seen this movie. Yeah,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
am
yeah.
too.
I'm a
Unfortunately,
huge
I
fan
watched it so much
of
that I
Fury
can't do
Road.
it anymore. But
Big.
um, yeah, Valhalla. I suspect I'm a little afraid to dig into it, but some of our alt-right internet commandos may have latched on to the Norse Valhalla.
Yeah. Well, there's been a Norse, you know, Nazi crossover, unfortunately, for some time. Okay, so Laura goes to an underground concert to meet the Morrigan. And along and a literal underground concert, they break into a subway station. And along the way, like we learn some
Mm-hmm.
things that give us more of a sense of Laura as a super fan. That like she was at Ball's second gig. She was there every night for Inanna's uh, concerts. She saw Lucifer. She saw Minerva. She saw Sekhmet. She saw Tara. She saw Woden's Valkyries, but she's never seen Morrigan before. And by the way, we also get a sense of like what kind of um, artists these are. So Ball's playing in like a disused warehouse, right? So you get the sort of sense of like, scrappy, kind of indie. Inanna, I don't know Camden particularly from music. Um, but like Minerva's playing in a movie theater, which is kind of unusual. And then Sekhmet, if Bethnal Green is like a really kind of working class neighborhood in East London, but she's also playing at the O2, which is like a big arena. And then the West End is like the theater district in London. So it's like a wide range of venue types, which is kind of interesting. Um, and then she uses this to contrast against the Morrigan, where she sort of says, those people are pop stars, these are underground stars, right? It
Mm-hmm.
like not just underground gods, but underground artists as well, which I thought was kind of an interesting dichotomy. And we get this whole thing about Morgan as like an urban legend.
Uh,
What did you think about that?
I mean, this is another instance where I probably should have looked up the Morrigan, but yeah, I just had no context for what the Morrigan's mythology is. So it was hard for me to place it.
Yeah, but I was more thinking about the modern mythology. I was like, this is reminding me a lot of
That's
like
okay.
Slender Man, right? That like because these things, the mythology in question, right? If you take a photo of her, you're going to see a picture of the person that you're going to fall in love with at the moment of your death. If you get a photo of her and you try to put it online, there's a doom button on social media. Like that's internet mythology. That's not classical mythology. It's about the here and now. Um, and then all of a sudden we get like this curveball where all of a sudden like there's this explosion of light and fire underground, and we get a very different person with huge
Right.
abs and a decapitated head and fangs and fire. Um, and nobody has any idea who they are. So I guess my question is like, you know, at the end of issue 2, given that this person is like wielding both fire and has a severed head, um, do you think that Lucifer killed the judge, or do you think that this guy killed the judge?
No, I still think, and this is a matter of timing. In that,
Mm-hmm.
I one of my favorite shows on Earth, extremely flawed as it is The Killing, where two detectives are trying to solve a murder, and
Yeah, yeah, I
pretty
remember
much
that.
every episode or every other episode, they come upon a new suspect who had contact with the victim before she died. And I know, and you know, from the just from the fact that there are 7 more episodes until the end of the season that this person killer. So, and
Okay.
yeah, so and also I don't like his sneer. I don't like the leather jacket just aesthetically. I can't take this guy seriously as a threat.
Oh yeah, he is super extra. I mean, like vampire fangs and shit. What is that kind of sunglasses called again?
The
Why am I
aviator
blanking?
sunglasses?
Yeah, aviators and like no shirt and seemingly an 8-pack. Like he's ridiculous.
He feels like
He is so over the
someone
top.
from one of the old Stephen King movies they used to do with no budget. This is your shorthand for
Yeah.
evil. This is another incarnation of Randall Flagg that I don't
Yeah,
care
well,
about.
I was also going to think like, if we think music instead of like um genre for a second. Like I could absolutely imagine this guy as like an album cover for some like death metal band back in the day.
Yeah, he seems dated.
Yeah, very much like trying to be rock and roll, like hardcore, but like 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah. Also, like
Um,
it just the chain is stupid. You should have a full size head that you're wearing.
oh yeah. The goat head on a chain, like the. To be honest, my thought about that was like, that must hurt. Like those horns are very pointy, and I would imagine there would be tons of times in which like you lean forward and you're poking yourself.
Well, I assume they're made of rubber, so
Yeah. But we do get a name for him in the final page of the issue. He is Baphomet,
right.
and we learn which is his sigil because it's on fire. Okay, so I'm going to end the episode here. Chris, do you have anything you'd like to plug?
Yeah, so I mentioned it before, but if you want to hear the only gay man in his 30s who's never seen Buffy talk about it and experience the mid 90s drama, check us out, Unspoiled Buffy the Vampire Slayer. We're on iTunes, Stitcher, all those places. And yeah, I'm a lot less serious on that show than I am here. So
Okay, so I'm gonna do a 10 count just because there are some spoilery things that I want to um, tee up for those of you who are spoiled who are watching this podcast. So Chris is gonna take his earphones out
okay.
so he doesn't get spoiled. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So, the new things in this issue, I'm going to talk a bit about um, the assassination of the judge in the next episode because that's where we actually get to meet Ananke. Um, but a couple things that are really important. We sort of uh, tee up the issue of like who Woden is and the way that his whole racist, sexist thing has to do with his marriage and his kid and who Woden actually is. The other thing that's super important is, in addition to uh, Byron as Lucifer, we see on the walls next to him Mary Shelley as Woden and Percy Shelley as the Morrigan. So, like, it's really a sense that like the Romantics were the gods of their time. Um, and that'll be it for this episode. Bye bye.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.